So it's only 9:35 and we're able to get going. All right, so we're going to start now in the book. It's on page 55.
No.
Yes, 56.
A year, yeah.
And this is for this week's Torah portion, which is called Vayeda. I muted everyone for background noise. If there's anything you'd like to ask, to be able to make sure that the flow of the conversation is understood, there's a way for you to either
Can we write in the
Put it in the
chat.
chat.
You can, yeah, put it in the chat, or I think there's a way to wave or something like that. So yes, you can write in the books. It is. We're rolling with the punches here. We'll figure out what for next time. We'll be a little bit more organized as we get into this. Okay. So there is a what's called a parsha overview, and the Torah portion is the fourth from the beginning of the Torah, where the beginning of the unfolding of the biblical profiles, biblical images that we have. We went through Adam and Eve and Noah, and now we're really starting what we would call the beginning of the Hebrews, because Jews, as we know them today, technically Jews, they don't begin until Sinai. When the Hebrews are Abraham and Sarah's family, next generation is Isaac and Rebecca, and we'll be reading about these in the coming weeks. But their family grows, and they have the whole Passover story in Egypt and so on, but they're not technically Jews. It's the Hebrew people. And they don't have the obligations of mitzvahs, and at least most of them. And coming to Sinai was like a mass conversion. And so here, while we sometimes call Abraham and Sarah the first Jews in the loose sense, technically it's not correct. They were the first, the Hebrews, and they certainly are very, very important preliminary to the Jewish people and the Jewish mindset. And studying about them is not studying history, it's about studying about ourselves and studying about, there's Abraham and Sarah within us, and what they created and what they brought to the world is fleshed out in our Judaism, but it's very much there. They are our matriarch, not just in the biological sense, because for some of us it's not in the biological sense. They're in the spiritual sense. They're still part of us. So the overview is about the Torah portion. Torah portion is packed, but a lot of good stuff to talk about. And we're not going to talk about most of it. We're just going to zero in on one piece of it. But here's a bit of an overview, just for our biblical literacy. It says, God reveals himself to Abraham 3 days after the first Jew, and even they call him a Jew, and we can put a little asterisk there, circumcision at age 99. In last week's Torah portion at the end, God tells Abraham that he and Sarah are going to be able to have a child together, even though that would be miraculous. That would be not possible for them. He's 99, she's 89, and he circumcises himself. He's told to circumcise himself. That's the first mitzvah that he had, actually the only technical mitzvah, as mitzvah means a commandment. He was commanded to do any of these things. And he circumcises himself. And now the scene opens in this week's Torah portion. He's by his tent. And this is actually an important part of the narrative. Abraham and Sarah were lovers of humanity. That really is a very important encapsulation of who they are. They're referred to that way scripturally also. An important, or perhaps the most important dimension that they brought to the world was this idea of caring and love and connection between people and between people and God. They walked into, or they were born into, an atmosphere of polytheism. And an atmosphere of polytheism is largely an atmosphere of fear, because people, they were very vulnerable. They're vulnerable to the elements, vulnerable to wild animals. They lived, most of them, it was agricultural, and therefore being a farmer is being very vulnerable. Because it's, no rain, you do whatever you want, but there's nothing, you can't create that. Or maybe you can today in Israel, but you're very vulnerable. And therefore, it was the polytheism, as we understand it, as it unfolded, was like trying to pacify all the forces that could hurt me. I'm afraid of the blight in the crops. Find that God of blight and pacify it. I'm worried about that there's no rain. How do we find that God of rain? And take care of that. But in theory, one would think that if someone was sitting totally comfortable and not afraid about all these overarching forces in the world, they have no need for God. Life is good. It's because we're afraid of things. That's what we're trying to pacify God. Abraham said, God isn't about just, escaping this danger or protecting ourselves from that specific force that threatens us. It's about a loving creator who loves us, created us, who's part of us, there's godliness within us, and who wants us to be able to connect with each other, created the world as a kind of a test and a mission for us to see what we can do to make this world whole and peaceful and loving and caring. So Abraham and Sarah, just on the retail end, without all the theology, one of the things is they cared about people. And Abraham became a wealthy man. And one of the things that they did is they set up, for the time they were living in the desert, which was a lot at the time, they set up like an inn in the desert, which was very necessary. People, travelers, they didn't have access to things. And so they were there giving people provisions. So here it says, get back to the scene as it opens up in the Torah portion. Again, that's not, this is actually what I just said is part of what we're going to talk about today. But just to look at the overview of the Torah, Abraham's sitting at the opening of his tent, and Abram rushes off to prepare a meal for 3 guests who appear in the desert. So 3 people show up at the inn. And here he's 99 years old, just went through surgery, but he's running off to try and make them food. One of the 3, and all of these are actually angels disguised as men. One of them announces that in exactly 1 year, the barren Sarah will give birth to a son. And Sarah laughs. Okay, we're not going to touch that one today. Abraham pleads with God to spare the wicked city of Sodom. This would know maybe Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom was a city which was the antithesis of Abraham, in the sense that the cruelty was the way they rolled with each other and with others. And God says, I'm going to destroy this city. 2 of the 3 angels, disguised angels, arrive in the doomed city, where Abraham's nephew Lot extends his hospitality to them and protects them from the evil intentions of a Sodomite mob. 2 guests reveal that they've come to overturn the place and to save Lot and his family. Lot's wife turns into a pillar of salt. You may have remembered this a little bit in some biblical stories. When she disobeys the command to not look back at the burning city, as they say. So God does destroy the city. What's beautiful there, again, we're not talking about it today, is that Abraham argues with God about not destroying the city, even though they're really nasty people. But Abraham stands up for them against the human suffering. And God ultimately does destroy the city. And while taking shelter in a cave, Lot's 2 daughters, believing that they and their father are the only ones left alive in the world, get their father drunk, lie with him, and become pregnant. 2 sons born from this incident father the nations of Moab and Ammon. Yeah, I'm going to touch that. Abraham moves to Gerar. No, there's plenty to talk about, but it's not for today. And if you need to really prepare for that. Abraham moves to Gerar, where the Philistine king Abimelech takes Sarah, who is presented as Abraham's sister, to his palace. In a dream, God warns Abimelech that he will die unless he returns the woman to her husband. Abraham explains that he feared he would be killed with beautiful Sarah. God remembers his promise to Sarah and gives her and Abraham a son, who was named Isaac, Yitzchak in Hebrew, meaning will laugh. And Isaac is circumcised at the age of 8 days. He's the first one to be at 8 days, which is the practice of the Jewish people. And we don't actually, to my other point, I can't resist throwing in the points of Jewish knowledge. We don't circumcise our children because Isaac circumcised himself at 8 days, or it was circumcised at 8 days, because that's really pre-mitzvahs. The reason we circumcise ourselves is because that the Torah from Sinai we're told to circumcise themselves in memory of what happened with Abraham and Yitzchak. But it's we don't just do things along because that's what they used to do. We have a question in the chat. I can't read it. The screen of words is not running with the reading. I'll tell you what. Good. Thanks for bringing that up, because I should be doing this. Okay. Thanks. I'm going to learn this eventually. Okay.
Keep
going. Okay.
Click on the screen.
So that was almost,
Last one says Lot's wife turns into a pillar.
oh, so I gotta go even further, sorry.
No, nothing's moving.
So you're still technically on.
Yeah, you're on the first
So
column.
click just on the PowerPoint itself,
On the white.
click on the white space,
Okay,
and now try. There you go.
sorry, guys.
Everyone here over the age of 30
Yeah,
feels a
yeah.
tremendous kinship with you right now. We are not judging at all. No. This is our life.
Except there are two people. Yeah, okay.
They're closest to the door, Rabbi.
They're going on TikTok later, I was a senior citizen. Okay, so,
As long as it's not Twitter.
okay, so, and Abraham is 100 years old, and Sarah 90 of their child's birth. Hagar and Ishmael are banished from Abraham's home and wander in the desert. God hears the cry of the dying lad and saves his life by showing his mother a well. You know,
Things are switching a lot.
57. I think we're good at this. Okay. Abimelech makes a treaty with Abraham and Beersheba, and Abraham gives him 7 sheep as a sign of the truce. Again, we're not going to touch all this, but it's for your biblical literacy. You can check this out later.
I just have a
Okay.
quick question.
Sure.
So in this paragraph, it talks about where Abraham, Sarah was given to Abimelech, but Abimelech has a dream to return Sarah back to her husband.
Right.
But according to Abimelech, Abraham's his sister.
Right. So it's actually a great point. I mean, the Abimelech actually, it seems like he wasn't a bad guy. He was just, that's what they did. And so when in the dream it says, that guy is not her brother, it's her husband.
Oh,
And then he says to Abraham, why did you do this? Why did you set me up for this? I would never have done it. I thought she was free.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. But thanks. Okay, so now we're gonna go forward. Wherever forward is.
Just a dumb question.
Yes,
Just
no such
curious.
thing.
Do you have any insight in terms of what the definition of a year is? Because when you talk about 90 and 100 and this beautiful Sarah and all this other, I mean.
So that's
there's a difference,
It's a
right?
great question. So what's the definition of a year? And especially in those early generations, I mean, this is mild compared to what we have as far as the generations. There are those who will, work that through in different ways of how to redefine a year. It's a little difficult for me, and I'm not speaking for that. I'm not saying that those are invalid approaches. I would say that the majority of Torah approaches, the overwhelming majority of Torah approaches, are that before the flood, the human condition operated at a very different level, and therefore it's not our way of we can't even fathom it in our reality. So after the flood, you'll see Torah-wise that things really go down a lot. Now, living till 127 is still a lot, but it ain't 927. So here, Abraham and Sarah and those generations, they live very long by our standards, but not what we call exponentially long or outrageously long. So we do see it as a year, and we see that there's been a diminishing within the human condition, and maybe we're coming back, with medicine and knowledge and nutrition to be able to bring it back to prolong our life. But humans managed to just to nature and what they were doing and how they were eating and so on to diminish the lifespan. So because even Moses would say 120 was that's how he lived and was not seen as unusual. That's in the way we look at it good way. Obviously, once it came to the times of the Talmud or someone, it was not like that at all. So you have to go and think: is it possible that 3,000 years ago people lived in the world? If the things you talk about the steps of faith, this is not my biggest.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think someone did mention, I did hear a rabbi do the conversion of the years. I don't know if it was 5-1 or 6-1. It was something scientific that they did talk about.
There definitely could be those, and it's for me to be able to look at Torah and I'm not going to say play with it, but to reframe it in a way that takes it out of its normal interpretation. I would need to feel really compelled. I don't feel compelled.
But
So
there
no.
aren't any mafarshim that give,
No, but I'm sure this rabbi. Some people may feel compelled, I don't. No problem. Go on YouTube, you'll find something. Okay.
Fair enough. Move
Okay.
on.
Okay, so now we're gonna get to and this discussion we have today is really it's gonna get into Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah's approach to humanity were mostly not Hebrews because they were the only Hebrews. And we want to make it relevant to talk about it for ourselves also, but this is about the idea of seeing within the good and the potential within humanity, and the good not only as the potential of different skills and talents they can bring to the world, but also the idea that our assumption is, the working assumption is that people deep inside want to be good with God. And someone may say to me, I don't believe in God, I don't care about God, and I'm not going to be disrespectful and say, yes, you do. But inside, I'm thinking, well, maybe, that maybe you just have to help them get through some static to be able to get there. But that it's at the core of the being is a sense of connection with God. Okay, so now let's get into just some of the basics right now. Abraham and Sarah, we said, this is from a verse, text 1a is a verse in the Torah, and this Torah portion it says, he, in this case, he and she, they planted an Ashel. What is an Ashel? We'll find out in a second. An Ashel in Beersheba. So they're out in Beersheba, which is out in the desert, and he plants whatever this Ashel is, and he calls it in the name of God, the everlasting God. So he has God in mind. Again, it's Abraham and Sarah. They have God in mind, plant this Ashel. What is an Ashel? Text 1b. We have from the Medrash, it says, what does it mean any plant of an Ashel in Beersheba? Rabbi Yehuda and Nechemi disagreed over the translation of the word Ashel. This is not a normal Hebrew word. Rabbi Yehuda said, an Ashel is an orchard. Ask for anything you want, dates, grapes, or pomegranates. He wanted to feed people. So he went out into the desert and he did something unnatural. He managed to, one of the first, ecological scientists, he's trying to figure out how to plant an orchard because he wants people to be able to have access to it out there. But Nehemiah said, an Ashel is an inn. Ask for anything you want, bread, meat, wine, or eggs. In other words, he had produce there. The main thing was that he had this little inn going on. And he didn't need the money. He did it. He wanted to provide for people. Okay. And in text 1c, we find from in the Talmud, one of our great commentaries, Rashi is the primary commentary on the Torah and the Talmud in the 11th century. It says Ashel is actually an acronym for three Hebrew words: Achila, Shtia, and Levia. Food, drink, and accompaniment. We'll take care of you. Come on. We're your local desert hitman. We're going to take care of you, and we'll provide your needs. Oh, wait.
but why would he use the word plant? He planted.
Oh, yeah, you want the mouse. What you the mouse? You do with the mouse.
Oh, what to do with the mouse? Yeah, you did? Want it?
Oh, good idea.
Sorry, give it to someone who can.
No, I'll figure it
And
out.
this, he don't know. David is one of those under 30. Okay.
Mentally. I'm emotionally. Sorry. No,
So,
we get it.
so
My child.
your idea, your question is, it does planting does denote planting as an agriculture. That's why that's the first opinion there in the Medrash. But it is used, also used biblically, much less so, of the idea of establishing family.
Right.
So they made it in.
Mhm.
Okay, so now we go to text 2. So what would he do? They had an agenda. What was their agenda? God, love of people, and God. So what he first of all, they were serving people. And I look at text 2 from this week's Torah portion. And so he said, My master, I have found favor in your eyes. Do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, bathe your feet, and recline under the tree. And let me fetch a morsel of bread, as you may refresh yourselves, then go on, seeing that you have come your servant's way. And they replied, yes, do as you have said. Now, these three angels, who are men, that was his thing. He was giving to people. He hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, quick, prepare 3 sons of choice flour, knead and make cakes. And Abram ran to the herd. He took a calf, tender and choice, gave it to the servant boy who hastened to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared. Notice that it was beaten milk together. It's another conversation for another day. And set these before them. And he waited on them, even though it just said they had no mitzvahs per se, but still we talk about it. And he waited on them under the tree as they ate. Okay, so their agenda seems to be just giving, but they had a larger agenda. A larger agenda was trying to bring God consciousness to the world. So what did he do? Text 3a. It says he called on the name of God, the everlasting God. The Talmud tells us you read this in a way where you change the vowelization a little bit. So that doesn't mean Rabbi Shlokish, who's a rabbi at the Talmud, says, don't read it, and he called out, rather, and he caused others to call out in God's name. This teaches us that Abraham, our patriarch, taught every wayfarer to call out in the name of God. He was trying to get people to connect with God. How did he do that? Well, how? After they had their fill of food and drink, they would arise to thank him. He would say to them, you did not eat my food, you ate what belongs to the God of the world. Thank and praise he who spoke and the world came into being. So, on the one hand, you can say Abraham had the first Chabad house. That's, you have people over for Friday night. You don't say, you have some wine, you have some good food and good company. And then you say, by the way, how's your Judaism going? And that's, I plead guilty. 30 years, it's working. So that's one thing. But I'll tell you something that bothered me always as a child is to take this a little bit further. It won't bother us at the end of this, but it did bother me as a child. Let's go to the next one, 3a. 3b. If the wayfarer would agree to thank God, they would eat, drink, and depart. If they would not agree to thank God, Abraham would say, no, so pay me what you owe me. I'd never do that, by the way. That's called bait and switch. And just you come in, you have someone as your guest. You come as someone as your guest. They say, I totally don't agree with anything you told me. Say, okay, enjoy the gefilte fish and move on. Here, he said, no, now that you ate already, here's the bill. That doesn't sound good. And the wayfarer would ask, what do I owe you? Abraham would reply, a measure of wine is 10 coins, a measure of meat is 10 coins, a measure of bread is 10 coins. Because otherwise, who'll give you wine, meat, and bread in the wilderness? Say this is business is business. It's supply and demand, and there's no supply out here, buddy. So there's this. I can charge you a premium price. When the wayfarer would see no way out, and say, "Blessed is God of the world."
Blackmail.
Absolutely. So here, this is head on. Really, it's addressing. It's really, in a way, it's addressing the whole Chabad perspective, because how many people would say, I say you want to put on film? You don't put on. Oh, okay, I'll do you a favor. Okay, so now you think, what good of film is that if the guy just did me a favor, right? But some FedEx guy comes in here and says Goldstein on his thing, like, you got a minute?
So they stop and do it.
Sometimes, sure. We try to get them. It's like, I love you over UPS. So what is? But one could ask, what's the value of that mitzvah? And certainly, what Abraham did, I would never do that. Is like you just come. We have this meal. Come to my house right now. Once it's done, if you're not playing the program, here's the bill. That can't be what it's supposed to be. So as they say here, now number 2, they phrased it in 63. It was actually a love tap, not a money trap. Okay, entrapment and false advertising 4a. As I said, the Medrash says that Abraham would welcome the passersby. In other words, people would come, and they were passing by. So, and we're going to get a little more into this. It's not like he went out and invited people. People were passing by, And why did they pass by? They passed by because he had an inn. So in their minds, they're coming to an inn. They're not coming to a free Friday night. They're coming to an inn. Once they ate and drank, he would tell them to say a blessing, and they would ask, well, what shall we say? He would reply, say blessing is the God. The world is what we eat. And we ate. So once they ate, he'd say, you know something? You don't have to eat. Just recognize where the food is coming from. This is just on a moral, legal end. Before we get into what understanding what we really want to get to, just to satisfy our minds that Abraham wasn't just trapping people. Mendy states, and this is from a great rabbi of the 16th century, he says, the Mendy says that he, 4b, Abraham would welcome the passersby. Means that this tells that Abraham did not recruit visitors. He didn't go and recruit visitors on the false pretenses. That's immoral. And you can't say the end justifies the means. Rather, word of his hospitality spread, and visitors would come on their own. Got it in, and he's got food. Had a financial claim against his guests. He didn't invite them to come for free. And he had the right to forgive this claim if they chose to bless God. If they arrived expecting a free meal, it was their mistake. They should have asked up front. Okay, so this is technical. It's a technicality. We're not going to satisfy ourselves with this. But the saying is, he didn't invite anyone on false pretenses. He had this thing. People got to know him, and they said, he had a little sign in over there. And people came. They should have been expecting a bill. They said, you know something? I'll forego the bill. As long as here's what I want to satisfy me. What is that? It's like 65 along these lines. Says if they believe that the food came from Abraham rather than from God, they would be obligated to pay him. Why shouldn't they? He gave them good. It belonged to him. There's no free lunch. But if the food came from God, which Abraham saw that he was just God's messenger to bring food to them, it was ultimately God who blessed him with the ability to give food. Abraham had no claim against them because they could argue that God gave it to Abraham so he could give it to them, which is what he actually believed. But now that they denied God and his ownership of the food, it was only right that they pay Abraham. If they were going to pay, there would be no limit to how much they would offer. Who could prepare a table in the wilderness? So in other words, they're saying on a legal end, on a technical end, Abraham is saying, if you're with me, if you see the world as I see it, you don't have to pay because I see myself as God's agent. I'm wealthy and I'm able to give this to you, no problem. If you're denying that idea of God, wow, that means it's mine. But pay me. So again, was he going to make genuine conference out of this? That's really questionable. What was the point of the exercise? I think with this, we satisfied that he wasn't just entrapping people for some weird thing that he's trying to get to some objective that we don't even understand actually. But he wasn't entrapping anyone. He wasn't inviting anyone for a free meal and then turning the tables on them. He had an inn. They came in as an they came to the place as an inn. They should have expected to pay, and now he was going to relieve them of the money under certain circumstances. So what was he doing? In a way, he was doing a kind of like a Chabad thing. He really was trying to teach people. His goal was not only to love and care for people and teach them to love and care for each other. He wanted them to understand that there's purpose in life and there's a God, and that there's God who creates them, and a loving God. And therefore, he delved into all of the polytheism. He was very knowledgeable. He was a philosophy major. And the Talmud tells us, Rav Chizdus in text 5, Rav Chizdus said to Avini, we have a tradition that our patriarch Abraham's tractate, in other words, a volume of knowledge on idolatry, had 400 chapters. What do you mean it had 400 chapters? It means he invested himself, and he would sit around the table with people with wine, gefilte fish, beer, brisket, and he says, so what is it that you believe? Really? So you believe in praying to a tree or a toad or the sun? What problem? Let's talk about this. And really what he wanted to do is he wanted them to open themselves up, to make themselves emotionally available to thinking a little bit different. But he wasn't trying to just coerce them and say, say a blessing, do this. It was trying to change their mindset and help them along. And if you look at text 6 from the previous Rebbe, where he put it, he said, Abraham, thank you so much for this, David. Abraham would explain with many parables and examples so that it would be well received and understood by his students. He was able to distill complex teachings about monotheism in such simple language that even lay people understood. Those who did not understand could sense the truth in his words and would acknowledge that he was right. He spoke with such passion and love for God that even those who didn't understand him felt the vitality and truth in his words and were compelled to agree with him. Sometimes, and I've seen this with people, not me, I'm saying, but just sometimes you could just see that someone they have a truth. They're saying something, I don't fully get it, but I want to have what he's having or she's having, because there's something in the way they're speaking. So Abraham, he made it in an emotionally and psychologically pleasing atmosphere. They were, even though he was an oddball, he was a person that he was, the Hebrew actually means, Talmud says it's like from the word Ivri, like Ivrit in Hebrew, it says it's Aver, like a side. He was on one side of the world and everybody else was on the other side. He was a counterculturalist. He was very different. And so they were oddballs. And here they come into this oddball, because he was well-known oddball, and he sees an house, and he smiles, and he has good briskets, and intelligent. That's good thought. And then you see he really means it. So it was very attractive. And he and Sarah, we find it in the Torah that he and Sarah really impacted many, many people. They started to bring people towards monotheism. Now, that was for most of the people. What would happen in text 7? Which really brings us more to the essence of what our discussion is about today. It says in text 7, says when Abraham saw that some people did not take to any of his explanations. This is what how did he understand it? This was because they were encased in an unusually resistant coarseness of things holy. No, sometimes we have a psychological block, and people have told me that. I've had people say, I wish I could believe there's something. I had this growing up, or I just can't get there. Faith is like falling in love. It's either you do or you don't. It's and if someone has a blockage to that, what do you do with that? So here, because it was a blockage to faith in God, he would put them in a bind to create just enough pressure to break through their unusually coarse resistance. Once the crust was broken through, his previous arguments would begin to resonate with them, at least partially, and they would recognize God. They would then say, "Blessed is the God of the world, whose fruit we ate." Putting someone into a position to get their attention, and I don't want to, maybe it's not, it works against my interest to use that as an example, but this as an example, there's a Chabad organization which is quite large today and has a lot of work today. It's addressing Jewish inmates in the penal system. It's called the Aleph Institute, and they have a captive audience, so and it's actually very effective because people are looking for something, and that pressure, none of us ever know, that pressure kind of dispels a lot of distractions that maybe didn't interest them in a different light. So he wasn't putting them in prison, but he was clamping down a little bit, getting their attention, and say, something I see there's something, you're not open. And what the Rebbe was saying here is that he never actually charged anybody anything. He never actually did that, but he would use that as a little bit, leverage. Yeah.
But there's been look at televangelists, any channel on Sundays, but there are people that have gone into the penal system, not of Jewish faith, to bad word, it's the only one I propagandize.
Missionize.
But they're missionaries, they
sure,
go, now
sure,
they're
of
in
course.
prisons, and so there are many Jews in prison.
Yeah.
There was an article last year, there was a Jew on death row, and this rabbi visits him all the time. Do you remember, there was
Jew went where?
he's in death row.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, yes, and so this rabbi has gone to him and helped him.
As he should.
As he should, and so this is not. This might be the beginning of that, I mean, we don't proselytize, we don't knock on doors and our students.
Except to
and-
Jews,
what's that?
except to Jews.
Well,
Yeah.
right, but we don't knock on people, my mother had, the Jehovah's Witness came to her house. And showed
Mine
him the
too.
door, right? And he said he wants to talk to him about his religion.
Yeah.
So my mother said, well, terrific. She says, I'll listen to you, but first you can listen to me. And they said, well, we're not allowed to do that. And my mother said, okay, and shut the door. That was the end of that. I think they took her off the list. But so that this has been going on, so
Yeah.
to make him look negative.
Right, I know, so I guess, right, so I guess I shouldn't have brought the
No,
the penal system thing, but here it was really the leverage of saying, maybe I get your attention with this. Now. What, so if you take a look, really what we're saying is that Abraham knew. Let me take it to a different place. In my life. There's someone I know who's passed away, and he's the child of someone who was good friends with people around here, and he was absolutely opposed to anything religious. In a way that I would say probably the most of anyone I've ever encountered. In a way that even when he got sick, and usually no atheists and foxholes. He asked his parents, don't light those shots. He was diagnosed on a Friday. I mean, what do you lose by lighting the shots against? Maybe it's just right. I never met someone so virulently opposed. And he really did. I would be sometimes in the office, I would wave, I'm a friendly guy. And he didn't, bark at me, but he really was not interested in a relationship. Once he was in a hospital bed, I would come to visit. And he didn't become observant. He actually asked me to please, he said, I know you're gonna do my funeral, I have no say, please make sure no one thinks I believe what you believe. I did. Yeah, I did. No problem, you got it. Yeah. But the thing is, we ended off with a certain friendship. I don't know what was going on in his mind. But I think something's penetrated. Because I was going regularly. And he was in a position, I think he was a little more open to hear. Now, why did I keep going there? He doesn't want to see me. Doesn't want me to do his funeral. He doesn't, he doesn't like the fact that I pretty much his parents. Okay, but it's because he's my brother, and I don't. There's no scoreboard where if he made a blessing, then I get some bonus from Crown Heights or something. It's. I want, and I believe people need a connection with God. People need a connection with themselves. A connection with God and a connection with themselves come together. So I just wanted to help. And even if he wasn't so nice to me, I'm trying to see beyond it. Because
Did you ever ask him if he had a negative experience?
his parents told me about something happened when he was growing up.
There has to be
And we
something.
probably, they had, I never asked him.
Right,
But
but
he
there has to
had
have been
a
something
traumatic,
about
yeah, they told me about a traumatic experience that they explained it as, but this is, he was 30 years past it. And
But sometimes things that happen negatively cause you to maybe internalize them more, as opposed to being able to say, oh, I'll put it here and I'm gonna go there. And I've met people.
And that was one of the things I bore in mind also. So it's not, I don't take it personally. It's like, nah, he doesn't even know me. He got traumatized. He's burned, and he sees that in me. I want to see beyond that to see him.
Needed therapy.
What? Yeah. So if you look at text 8, this is the quote they brought here is from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who passed away a couple of years ago. He was chief rabbi of the British Empire, amazing, great guy, brilliant. And he was at a banquet with Chabad representatives in 2011, and it was there. And he has a quote here. It's most people look at others and see what they see. Great people look at others and see what they are. The greatest of the great, and the Rebbe was the greatest of the great, look at others and see what they can become. And therefore, that was Abraham. He was looking at people saying, you know, you're too precious to let you just, I don't want you to just walk out of here and not have a consciousness of something that can help you, something higher than you. So I'm gonna get your attention. I'm gonna get your attention to saying, you know something, you don't believe in that whole God thing, so why do you think you get this for free? Yeah, he didn't charge them, but he was using leverage, tightening the screws. Text 9. We might suggest, at least by way of allusion, Abraham's words put them in a financial bind, and this forced them to consider their inner vice. Now, this I can tell you just because of where it's being translated from. This is not supposed to be vice; it's supposed to be lies, V-I-S-E. It's not a vice is like a tight grip. In other words, Abraham used two things here. So first of all, before we go to that, Abraham's approach was that everyone's valuable, everyone has a soul, everyone deserves a connection with God. I want to help them that connection with God. I'm going to invest my resources into that and my intellect into that, and try to and friendship and try to help people understand it. And I'm even going to use some leverage, which I don't like being leveraged, but it is the way it is. Now, here the Rebbe points out that the leverage he used itself had significance. Just that he had leverage. He chose very carefully his leverage because it was an illusion. It was an ALL illusion, or it was a metaphor for what he thought that they needed to hear. What's a financial bind? A bind it's a vise. They're feeling constricted. And that is that the vise of their own coarseness and resistance to holiness. One of the things that Torah talks about, and we have it throughout Torah, one of the things in Torah, and it's, if you look at the Torah certainly has a very central narrative about the slavery in Egypt. And that's how we formed this into a people. When we came out, 7 weeks later, we got the Torah. It's very big. But one of the things that the Torah consistently, going through 40 years in the desert, is always talking about this idea of remembering that we left Egypt. And even till today, there is considered a mitzvah that every day we should remember that we left Egypt. In the prayer we know as the Shema, which is actually 3 different sections of scripture. The third part of it is there just so that every day we remember Egypt, because we say Shema, we're supposed to remember leaving Egypt. Why do I have to remember leaving Egypt? Do I have to remember independence from King George every day? I'm happy. July 4th, I'm happy other days also. I love America, but I don't have to remember it every day. The idea is that the term of Egypt itself, in Hebrew, it's Mitzrayim. It comes, Jewish spirituality tells us it comes from a word, and I've spoken about this here countless times. Comes from a word which means like a bind, constriction, mitzarim, which means boundaries. It means constrictions, limitations, and we all have limitations, and we all have things that keep us, they get in the way of us being who we need to be. So I may wake up in the morning and say, now what do I want out of the world today? Or I have to look and say, what are my challenges today? Who am I? What's keeping me back? Maybe it's about how I feel about a certain person. Maybe it's my fear of approaching that customer, whatever. But we all have bonds, we all have limitations, and in our faith in God and faith in ourselves, we want to be able to get beyond our limitations. Sometimes we have an emotional limitation. I just, my connection with a person, or the ability to more functionally and healthily and emote and bond with that person. Here, you see, there's a barrier. Their own coarseness and resistance to holiness. He said, "You're in a bond." He said, "I'm squeezing you because I'm not squeezing you. You're squeezing yourself. You're not allowing your soul to breathe. He would help them realize that their unusually strong coarseness was the cause of their resistance to God. This realization brought them around to saying, "Blessed is the God of the world whose food we ate." In his discussion with them, he's saying, what's bothering you? What's getting in your way? You're being constricted by something. And therefore, him saying, food costs, giving them that constriction was really just an entree into saying, you're feeling it now? Okay, you're feeling that. But now identify and say, what are you feeling emotionally and spiritually? What's keeping you back? So that was point A of the why he used this methodology. And then text 10 says, so what did Abraham do? This is from a great rabbi from the 17th century. He located his inn in a barren desert, a place with no grapes, dates, pomegranates, or drinking. God was there for him in this place that didn't support human habitation, and he provided him with so much bounty that it sufficed to provide meat, wine, and bread for all wayfarers. He did really, it was miraculous stuff. He was able to put this all together in the desert. He worked hard, God helped him. Abraham therefore fed all passersby. If they would accept this proposition, bless God without demanding proof of God's existence, all is good. If not, God would present them with arguments that prove divine providence. He would say, if as you believe, God does not meddle in our lowly affairs, because everyone believes in some higher force. But you must ask yourself, who brought the wine, meat, and bread you ate to the wilderness? And you need to pay that cost. In philosophy, it's something called a first cause. Everything has a cost. And where does this come from? So even the first amoeba, whatever you say, the Big Bang, how did the first amoeba come to be? So at a certain point, we may say, can't figure that one out. I can only work from the amoeba on. But on the other hand, if we want to think about it and allow for all possibilities, even though there's some possibilities you can't find under a microscope, to say, Aristotle called it a first cause. How does that first amoeba get here? It traces us back to God. And you need to, if you're prepared to accept it free, if you're prepared to accept it for free, you're likely to agree that it came from God. Once they saw they were in a bind, namely that they were forced to consider the origin of their meal, they would admit their food was provided in the wilderness by God. They would then proclaim, blessed is the God of the world whose food we ate. In conclusion, they did not thank God to avoid defeat. Rather, Abraham used the question of the food's origin to demonstrate conclusively that God is the first cause of all existence. So you would say, okay, so let's talk about this. You have brisket in front of you. Where does that come from? And where does that come? And let's trace it back. So, in other words, here too, the idea of paying for the food, it gave them the constriction. It was also a good teaching tool. Exhibit A. Okay. So now let's go to text 11. Contemporary applications. So understand a little bit.
I guess in fast forward to today's battleground, right? You have the evolutionists.
Yeah.
And you have the religious. Okay, and you break it all down.
Yeah. And
you come to this, basically you come to the stalemate.
A stalemate because I can't show first cause. But it's first of all, it doesn't break down that easily necessarily. There are creationists who believe in certain level of evolution or not. But where the conversation breaks down is that even though someone who is, and these conversations find me. So I speak to some really intelligent people. No one has a good answer for where the first amoeba came from. But the point is, you set that aside. We'll never know that. But what went on? So I'll say I believe in a Big Bang. I also believe in a banger. It wasn't a spontaneous bang. So it just moves. It breaks down because if we're going to, technically, we're only talking about things that you can empirically see and so on. But the truth is, we're not empirically seeing a lot of stuff. The carbon dating, all of this stuff, there's a lot of conjecture in all of this stuff. So I would prefer to believe, so there's healthy science for me, that allows for things and for that are inquisitive and open-minded enough for even things that can't be empirically felt. And then there's a science that's going to be, that really is going to presuppose that there's nothing beyond what we can see. But even there, so no one ever felt a particle of gravity. How do you know gravity exists? You know gravity exists because of effects. Right? That's what, or someone knows otherwise. That, as far as I know, that's all we know. That's not so. How scientific is that? You see effects. So I look at the world, I see that's an effect.
A lot of the scientists I met over the years,
Yeah.
they all believed in their religion.
Yeah.
But they all believed in the Big Bang. But very rarely did somebody say one happened without the other.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating to sit and listen to people, the one person argue both sides against the middle. So
In my conversations with people, and I guess I only have whoever I've dealt with over the 30 years, to have someone who absolutely is against the idea of a first cause, I don't think anybody. At the end of the day, they don't know what it is. I don't know, you call it God, whatever. People push back against the person of God who cares about what I'm having for lunch. That's going to be more difficult. But the idea of a creator, when you drill down, it's very hard to get around that.
One thing I wanted to mention is, it keeps on mentioning a constraint or, the reason why he's talking to these people, welcoming them, it sort of looks at it more of a negativity. I think the word I would use is an opportunity to have a reason to talk to them about God.
I think that's great, because that's the way we see it. I mean, Abraham, it's framed that way, that he presented it that way. It does sound a little like a bait and switch, and then we just kind of work that out. But I'm telling you, when I grew up, and when I was taught this, the way I was taught it was a bait and switch. You know what I mean? I was a kid. I guess they didn't get into all this stuff, but so first you got to get past that, because it's a bait and switch. I don't want to hear what this guy has to say. Okay, so it wasn't bait and switch. But what was he doing? Yes, he sort of giving them opportunity. But there is, there's this balance. Do I want to make someone uncomfortable who's rushing to leave out, saying, give me a minute for two? I don't want to. Why do I get into this in someone's way? And then maybe you say, something, it's an opportunity. Okay. Text 11. This is from the Rebbe. No matter the circumstances of a Jew, he or she has a godly soul. Therefore, even while committing a sin, a Jew wants to remain a Jew and wants to do God's bidding. It follows that only the Jew's outer crust requires piercing. The internal core is intact even before the outer crust is pierced. When we apply pressure to pierce the external coarseness, our purpose is to reveal the intrinsic holiness that was already present within. The point is not, again, there's no brownie button, there's no scoreboard, there's nothing. I'm talking about here for Chabad. We don't need we're not looking for anything from anybody. The drive should come from a caring for people, and a caring for people enough to help them have an opportunity to connect with something that'll be good for them. If they don't want, they don't want. The lesson from Abraham's story is obvious. This is also from the Rebbe 12. The actions of our patriarchs, the matriarchs, point the way for their descendants. Therefore, we must behave as Abraham did and work to publicize God's presence around people. Should someone ask, what was accomplished by this? And a lot of the observant world would ask this of Chabad. They said, you guys are crazy, but I'm still on someone in Grand Central Station. What do you accomplish? After all, the Jew was convinced, we convinced to recite a blessing, chant the Shema, pray, did it unwillingly without heart. And the one who did so to be free of pressure. Whether they will do the mitzvah again tomorrow, we don't know. So what's the point? The other such arguments. Respond by relating the story from the Torah, which serves as a lesson to us. If in the days of Abraham, when he dealt with non-Jews before the Torah was given, this approach achieved the end goal of, in God's words to Abraham, you familiarized me to my creations, how much more so after the Torah was given, when we deal with Jews who want to be Jewish and want to do God's bidding. Our efforts with these Jews are surely consistent with their inner desire. Moreover, it is likely that the gentle pressure that brought them to do one mitzvah will inspire them to do another mitzvah, to the point that they will openly want to perform all the mitzvahs in their complete form. This effort to publicize the name of God in the world in a manner that makes God known to all his creations will hasten the time when measure for measure, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God. And this will be achieved by a king who will arise in the house of David and will inspire all of Israel to walk in the path and to repair the breaches in the words of Maimonides, about the written in the law of Torah during the true and complete redemption by Mashiach, our righteous Redeemer. So I'll leave it over there, but I think the idea and this attitude that just struck me is I have a friend, a rabbi in 20 years older than me, is a senior rabbi in Maryland, and he told me about an attorney he knows who he go into Washington DC every day and he would come into Union Station and someone would ask him to put on film. He'd say no. Day after day. And finally, he said to the student, said, "You're not going to wear me down. It's not, I'm not your guy. I keep saying, you keep asking me, I say, no, just, why do you even bother?" So he said, "Oh, you don't understand. I'm not here because I need you to specifically put it on. I'm here because I want you to know someone cares." That's okay. You keep saying no. I'm telling you, I still care. So now let's see if we can unmute. So there's a chat. I need better glasses. Not better glasses. Okay. I understand completely this perspective. However, if an individual does not believe, the approach is taken as offensive and impinging one's identity because of their perspective. What the Rebbe first as coarseness, they see because of their coarseness, they see as their identity. They did not see anything else. I agree with you, Leon, and that's why in what I do and the way I do it, I have to be very careful with it. And I don't want to be someone, and I hope that people don't experience me as someone where you say that. That I don't allow them for their own perspective or their own self-image. Someone says that's me, it's me. Like I say, even that guy who was not friendly to me and he insisted he doesn't believe in God. I'm not going to do that. Actually, my father is not well. I'm gonna have to leave here very soon. But there was a kid in our Hebrew school. I'm going to stop the share now. Maybe I'll get. Now I can see more people. Hello. Okay, so some of you probably heard this from me before. It's in the families of Centaur Hebrew School, there are those who are more Judaically inclined, those who are less Judaically inclined, and we don't vet them. You want your kid, well, take them. So it's one kid, and it's a wonderful family here in Basking Ridge. Both parents don't believe in God. Why they send their kids to Hebrew school, only God knows. But they're nice people, but they make it quite clear to their children they don't believe in God. And we actually had only the youngest child here. The two kids were in the temple somewhere for Hebrew school, and the youngest kid was here, and it came time for bar mitzvah. And the mother calls me, like frantic, and says he doesn't want to have a bar mitzvah. So, shocking. So I said, "Well, why do you think that is?" So I don't know. So what do you want me to do about it? You talk to him. So I can talk to him, but I'm not gonna fix him. I'll talk to him. Bring him to my office, sure. So he sits down in my office, and I say, "His name's Ross. Ross, why don't you have a bar mitzvah? Why should I?" Good question. Your brothers did. So what? Another good question. I said, your parents would really like it. Your grandparents would want to come up from Boca and see how it runs. So they can come up, but it's a hassle. It's a waste of money. I don't see the point. And like I said, we go to a restaurant somewhere and I'll have a 13th birthday party. I don't need it.
Rabbi, could you speak a little slower and louder? We're having trouble. I'm missing some of your great points. Maybe you need to wear a microphone or something, but we're missing some of the great points because I love the way you're speaking, but you're doing fast and you drop off. I'm sorry.
I intend to do that. You're new here. I'm sorry. Thanks for keeping me honest here. So this kid, he says he doesn't want to have a bar mitzvah. So I said, okay, so don't have a bar mitzvah. No, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not speaking for your parents. I'm not gonna push you. I don't care. However, for me, I don't teach Hebrew school anymore. The only time I have to spend with kids is in preparation for bar mitzvah. So we have good conversations. So how about we just have the conversations? Forget the bar mitzvah. You don't have to have a service. You don't have to have anything. But listen, I'm not gonna have the time to talk to you. How about we talk? So he says, okay, but it depends what you're talking about. So I said, I don't have a curriculum for you. He said, I don't want to talk about God. So I won't mention God. You talk about other things? Yes. Okay. So if I mention God, you point it out to me, I'll shut up. So we meet a few times, and I didn't mention God. And then he says to me, you know something? I just thought who we spoke about, community. I don't remember. One of these for sure was community, Jewish identity. And then he says, I decided I want to have a bar mitzvah. But it's not from me. I didn't push you. Why? So he said, because I'm Jewish, whatever that means, and it's what Jews do. And I belong to a group. Why should I be different? I'll have a bar mitzvah. So I said, great. He said, but I want you to do one thing for me. I said, what? I said, don't mention God by the bar mitzvah. I said, I think I can deal with that. At least not in English.
You might get no out of that, right? Yeah.
We don't understand won't hurt you. So what I'm saying that is in response to the point on the chat. I want to be respectful of different people's self-image, and I don't think I'm a pushy guy, but I do have an opinion, and I do have an objective. The objective is to be embracing of people, to care about people, and I believe that people do better in this game we call life, which doesn't always feel like a game. Knowing of their own godliness and purpose and connected to them. That's the response to that question. Let's get one more here. Yes, it does seem very quiet without a microphone. It's hard to hear. I'm sorry to hear that. Okay, so we may get me a microphone, or I may wise up and keep my voice loud, but it's about my own consciousness. So as I said, this is a work in progress, and we made it through the second one. Pretty good. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Question about,
Thank you.
you said that poor fellow who was sick and still didn't want you to be involved in his spiritual care, or what was the final thoughts on that? I had really trouble hearing.
Yeah, so while I knew him for a good number of years from a distance, because I knew his parents well, and he really did not want any close connection with me. We just, I would say hello, and he would say hello back if I saw him, but he never stepped foot in this building. And I only saw him in his parents' office or home. During my time visiting, I've made a point to visit him quite often in the hospital and in rehab. And I think we created a bond. He did resign himself to the idea that I would be performing his funeral. He did not tell me he believes in God. He didn't tell me there's no like stories. And all of them, wow, he had this spiritual epiphany. I do believe he and I became friends. That's for sure. That changed. And I do believe he opened up a little bit. That's all I can say. It's not this inspiring little 30-second YouTube bit. I did this and I said that, and all of a sudden he changed his mind. Didn't happen. But I think that people ultimately it's there, and the desire for a connection is there, and it can be layered and layered and layered and layered, and everybody's got their own situation. But I never give up on the idea that something in there's a desire for connection.
I know that you're in a rush, but maybe for next time, can we talk about neshamos and you know,
Souls, yeah.
yeah, where they come back.
Okay, so they,
There's no new souls, they come back, because you talked about, you know,
So-
Arsina and.
SD is asking about, see, the thing is, now we're on a curriculum, so I don't even know what they got for next week. But I, supposed to talk about the souls and I guess like transmigration of souls, reincarnation, stuff like that. I'm up for that. I don't know if it's gonna fit into next week or not, but we can try.
Yeah, it's only because you mentioned Har Sinai, where the first Jew was really from Har Sinai, not
From-
Abraham.
From Sinai, yes.
Um,
Yeah, and, right, so we are all more Jewish than Abraham and Sarah were. That's.
Right.
Go and
But
see
can a
that.
Jewish soul
Huh?
come
Go
back
and
as,
see that.
does a Jewish soul come back as a Jewish soul, or can it go into a non-Jewish soul? I mean, like, do these souls,
that's
how do they come back?
Good question.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
No, it's just not for now. But,
I'm
I'm not sure I want to get into that at all. I'm recording. Yeah. Okay,
Did you want me to add this in for you?
Cool.
It's always. The night, follow this, you get along in